The sound comes first, not the crack of the rifle, that comes after. In the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, winter 1942, a Soviet soldier hears it, one metallic tap. Then silence. Then two more taps, slow and deliberate. It's not random, it's a language. 50 meters away, hidden in the skeletal remains of a factory window, a German sniper adjusts his scope. He's been watching this section of rubble for 3 hours. The taps, metal on metal, faint but clear, sound like nervous movement. A soldier checking his rifle. A mistake. The German exhales slowly, finger tightening on the trigger. But the taps aren't a mistake. They're bait. In the shadow of a collapsed wall, a Soviet counter-sniper lies motionless, breath barely visible in the sub-zero air. She's been watching the German for 2 hours. The taps were her partner's signal, a coded rhythm that says, "Target located, northwest, 2nd floor." She doesn't rush. The battlefield is silent except for distant artillery. Then the German shifts, just slightly, to get a better angle on the sound. That's when she fires. One shot. The echo rolls across the frozen Volga. The German sniper slumps forward. The taps stop. And somewhere in Soviet command, another tally mark is added to the board. If you love stories that reveal the invisible strategies behind history's bloodiest battles, hit subscribe, because what you're about to discover will change how you see war forever. By late 1942, the Eastern Front had become a nightmare of industrial-scale killing. German forces, despite early successes, found themselves trapped in a brutal war of attrition. And nowhere was this more evident than Stalingrad, a city that had become a symbol neither side could afford to lose. The Wehrmacht arrived with confidence, superior training, and one of the war's most feared weapons, their sniper detachments. German marksmen, many trained in specialized schools, deployed across the ruins with devastating effect. A single sniper could freeze an entire Soviet company for hours, picking off officers, radio operators, and medics with surgical precision. The psychological toll was immense. Soviet soldiers learned to fear the silence between battles more than the battles themselves. But the Red Army was learning. Soviet command recognized that traditional infantry tactics were useless in Stalingrad's apocalyptic landscape. The city had been pulverized into a labyrinth of rubble, collapsed buildings, and skeletal factories, perfect terrain for snipers. Fighting here required a different kind of soldier, a different kind of thinking. Enter the Soviet counter-sniper program. Drawing from hunters, competitive shooters, and rural marksmen, the Red Army began training its own sharpshooters. But equipment alone wouldn't win this shadow war. The Soviets needed tactics that could turn the enemy's greatest advantage into their greatest vulnerability. They needed to make fear itself a weapon. The architect of this transformation was a name that would become legend, Lyudmila Pavlichenko. By October 1942, she had already killed 309 enemy combatants, more than any female sniper in history. But her greatest contribution wasn't her kill count, it was what she taught others. Pavlichenko understood something the Germans hadn't fully grasped. Sound is a weapon. In the ruins of Stalingrad, visibility was measured in meters, not kilometers. Smoke, dust, and the endless gray of Soviet winter turned the battlefield into a sensory void. Vision was compromised, but sound? Sound traveled. Sound revealed. Sound could be manipulated. She began working with frontline units to develop acoustic signals, coded taps, scrapes, and rhythms that could communicate without words. These weren't radio messages that could be intercepted. They weren't hand signals that required line of sight. They were ghost languages, born from necessity, refined through trial and death. Each unit developed its own variations. One tap meant sniper spotted. 2 taps meant hold position. 3 meant moving to flank. The sounds were made with whatever was available: spent shell casings tapped against helmets, knife blades scraped against metal debris, even stones clicked in specific patterns. To German ears, these sounds meant nothing, just the ambient noise of a destroyed city. To Soviet counter-snipers, they were battlefield intelligence transmitted in real time. But the signals served a darker purpose. They were designed not just to coordinate, but to deceive. Soviet spotters would deliberately create sounds in exposed positions, mimicking the careless movements of inexperienced soldiers. A shovel scraping against concrete, the metallic clink of a canteen, the rhythm of someone checking ammunition. These were the sounds of vulnerability, of targets. And German snipers, trained to hunt for exactly these mistakes, would focus their attention, adjust their scopes, shift their positions ever so slightly. And that shift, that tiny adjustment, was the kill zone. Counter-sniper teams worked in pairs or triads. The spotter would create the sound. The sniper would wait, sometimes for hours. Scope trained not on where the sound came from, but on the likely positions where an enemy marksman would set up to watch that location. It was chess played with bullets, where every move revealed information, and patience was the ultimate advantage. German after-action reports from this period show a troubling pattern. Their snipers were dying at unprecedented rates. Not in firefights, not from artillery. They were being hunted by an invisible enemy that seemed to anticipate their every decision. Some Wehrmacht units began refusing sniper duty in Stalingrad. The hunters had become the hunted, and the psychological effect rippled through German lines. By January 1943, Soviet command had formalized these tactics into Doctrine. Counter-sniper teams received specialized training in acoustic warfare. They studied the physics of sound propagation through ruins. They learned how echoes behaved differently in winter versus summer, in fog versus clear air. They memorized the audio signatures of different weapons. A Mosin Nagant rifle sounded different from a German Kar 98K, allowing them to identify threats by sound alone. But more than technique, they learned patience. German snipers were taught to take the shot, to seize opportunities. Soviet counter-snipers were taught to create opportunities, to manufacture situations where the enemy would expose themselves. It was a fundamental philosophical difference: aggression versus manipulation. The most elite Soviet snipers became known as silence hunters. They would enter a combat zone and do nothing for days. Just listen, observe, map the acoustic landscape. They learned which sounds drew attention, which went unnoticed. They identified the rhythms of German patrols, the times when enemy snipers rotated positions, the moments of vulnerability. And then, when the moment was perfect, they would deploy their signals. The taps would begin. The bait would be set. And somewhere in the ruins, a German scope would glint in the filtered sunlight. Just once. Just enough. February 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad enters its final, desperate phase. German forces, surrounded and starving, fight with the fury of men who know they're already dead. But even in this chaos, the sniper war continues. Quieter, more personal, more psychological than the artillery barrages that thunder through the frozen air. Sergeant Klaus Hoffmann, a Wehrmacht sniper with 43 confirmed kills, crouches in the ruins of what was once an apartment building. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. His hands shake from cold and hunger, but his mind remains sharp. He's been hunting a Soviet sniper for 3 days, a ghost who operates in this sector, killing German officers with mechanical precision. Then he hears it. 3 metallic taps, rhythmic and clear. Southeast, maybe 40 meters. Hoffmann's pulse quickens. It's the sound of someone loading a magazine, the distinctive click of rounds being chambered. An amateur mistake. A gift. He shifts his position, moving toward a better angle. The rubble crunches slightly beneath him. Inevitable, but quiet enough. He raises his rifle, eye to scope, searching for movement. There, a shadow behind a collapsed beam. He can't see the soldier clearly, but the silhouette is enough. The taps continue, nervous, exposed. Hoffman takes a breath, holds it. His finger tightens on the trigger. This is the moment every sniper lives for, when all the waiting becomes purpose. But something feels wrong. The taps are too regular, too perfect, too exposed. Hoffman has survived 3 years on the Eastern Front by trusting his instincts. Every sniper develops this sense, the feeling that separates the living from the dead. He hesitates, finger still on the trigger, but not pulling. The shadow hasn't moved. The taps continue, mechanical and rhythmic. It's like a recording, not a real soldier. 20 meters to his left, concealed beneath a sheet of corrugated metal covered in snow, Sergeant Nina Lubkovskaya watches through her scope. She's been tracking Hoffman since dawn. She saw him enter the building, watched him settle into position, observed his breathing pattern. She's 22 years old and has 87 confirmed kills. She's also Ludmila Pavlichenko's star student. The taps are her partner's work, Private Dmitry Volkov, hidden in a position designed to be seen. The shadow Hoffman is watching isn't even human. It's a coat stuffed with straw, rigged to a wire that creates the silhouette. The taps come from Dmitry striking spent casings against a tin can. It's theater, and Hoffman is the audience. Nina watches him hesitate. Good, she thinks, smart sniper. But smart isn't enough. Because while Hoffman is focused on the decoy, wondering if it's a trap, he's forgotten the first rule of sniper warfare. Never stay in one position too long. Nina shifts her aim by 2 degrees. She's not targeting Hoffman's head, too small, too risky in this wind. She's targeting his chest, center mass, where even a near miss will be catastrophic. Her Mosin Nagant rifle is older than she is, the stock worn smooth by 1,000 hands before hers. But it's perfectly zeroed, perfectly maintained. She knows exactly what it will do. The taps stop. Silence floods the ruins. This is the moment, the psychological trap within the physical trap. When the sound stops, the natural instinct is to either take the shot or retreat. Hoffman has seconds to decide. He pulls back slightly, beginning to disengage. Wrong choice. The movement exposes his shoulder and part of his torso as he shifts away from the window. It's a quarter second of vulnerability, but for Nina, it's an eternity. She fires. The shot punches through the frozen air with a sound like thunder compressed into a single syllable. Hoffman jerks backward, the Kar 98K falling from his hands. He tries to breathe and can't. The bullet has shattered his clavicle and torn through his lung. He collapses behind the wall, invisible now, but it doesn't matter. He's bleeding out in sub-zero temperatures, alone in a building no one will reach before nightfall. Nina doesn't move. She watches for another full minute, confirming the kill. Then she signals Dmitry. 2 taps, then 1. Target down. Begin extraction. Across Stalingrad, this scene repeats. German snipers who once dominated the battlefield find themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that seems to exist in a different dimension. The Soviets have turned the ruins into an instrument, and they're playing a symphony of death. Oberst Heinrich Müller, commander of the 24th Panzer Division's reconnaissance unit, reports to his superiors, "Our sniper casualties have increased 400% in 6 weeks. The enemy is using sound to triangulate our positions. They are no longer reacting, they are predicting." The German response is to order snipers to move more frequently, to never fire from the same position twice, to avoid making any noise whatsoever. But these new protocols have their own cost. They reduce effectiveness, increase stress and make German marksmen more cautious when they need to be aggressive. Meanwhile, Soviet counter-sniper teams grow bolder. They begin using the signals not just as bait, but as psychological warfare. Sometimes the taps occur with no follow-up attack, just random noise designed to make German snipers paranoid, to make them question every sound. Are those taps a threat? A decoy? A genuine mistake? The uncertainty becomes corrosive. Sleep deprivation sets in, decision-making deteriorates, and when a German sniper finally does take a shot, exhausted and desperate, the Soviet counter-snipers are there, waiting, always waiting. By the time Stalingrad falls in February 1943, the tactical victory belongs to the Soviets. But the psychological victory is even more complete. German forces had been routed not just by superior numbers, but by superior adaptation. The Red Army proved that innovation matters more than equipment, that creativity can defeat tradition. But the signal tactics don't die with Stalingrad, they spread. As the Soviet counteroffensive pushes west through 1943 and 1944, counter-sniper teams deploy these acoustic techniques across every front. In the forests of Belarus, the taps become wood-on-wood rhythms that mimic woodpeckers or branches breaking. In the Baltic states, they use stones scraped across rock, sounds that blend into the coastal environment. In the Carpathian Mountains, they experiment with echoes, using the natural amplification of valleys to make single sounds seem like they're coming from multiple directions. The Germans never develop an effective counter-tactic. By late 1944, Wehrmacht training manuals include warnings about Soviet acoustic deception techniques, but offer no clear solutions. How do you fight an enemy that turns your own senses against you? How do you hunt someone who makes you hunt yourself? The answer, ultimately, was that you couldn't. The signal tactics weren't just about killing enemy snipers. They were about breaking the will of every soldier who knew a sniper might be watching. Terror, weaponized and refined into art. April 1945, Berlin. The Red Army stands at the gates of the Third Reich's capital. The war in Europe is days from ending, but the fighting remains vicious, building to building, room to room. And in these final battles, the signal tactics reveal their ultimate evolution. Soviet assault teams moving through Berlin use acoustic signals not for hunting snipers, but for coordinating urban combat. The taps have become a complete language, different rhythms indicating enemy strength, building clearance status, ammunition needs. German defenders hear the sounds and can't decode them. It's like fighting an enemy that communicates telepathically. But here's what history almost forgot. The signals had another purpose, one that only became clear decades later when Soviet veterans began sharing their stories. The signals were also for morale, for sanity, for humanity. In the hell of Stalingrad and the frozen misery of the Eastern Front, those metallic taps became more than tactical communication. They became proof that you weren't alone, that someone was listening, that in a landscape of death, coordination meant survival, and survival meant hope. When a Soviet soldier heard those taps in the darkness, they knew, my comrades are here. We are still fighting. We are still alive. The Germans heard noise. The Soviets heard language, community, resistance. They heard the sound of an army that refused to break, even when every rational calculation said they should. This is what the Wehrmacht never understood. They saw the Eastern Front as a military problem, requiring military solutions. The Soviets saw it as a survival problem, requiring total adaptation. Every tool, every sound, every moment became a weapon because it had to. There was no alternative. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, interviewed after the war, explained it simply. We were not trying to be clever, we were trying to live. The signal tactics weren't genius, they were necessity given form. When you're defending your homeland against annihilation, innovation isn't optional, it's mandatory. The numbers tell the story. Soviet counter-sniper units in Stalingrad achieved a kill ratio of nearly 3-to-1 against German marksmen, a stunning reversal of early war statistics. But numbers don't capture the psychological dimension. German snipers began reporting auditory hallucinations, hearing taps and signals that weren't there. Medical records show increased cases of combat stress and sniper neurosis among Wehrmacht marksmen. They were being defeated before they ever took a shot. By contrast, Soviet sniper morale soared. Units requested transfer to counter-sniper duty, a role that would have been considered suicidal in 1941. The signal tactics had transformed the battlefield from a place of chaos into a place of control, from randomness into choreography. And in war, the side that controls the narrative controls the outcome. The final revelation came after the war, when military historians analyzing Soviet tactics made a startling discovery. The signal system wasn't just tactical innovation, it was cultural continuity. In the forests and steppes of Russia, hunters had used similar techniques for centuries. Acoustic signals to coordinate group hunts, to communicate without alerting prey, to maintain cohesion in vast wilderness. The Red Army hadn't invented these signals, they had adapted them. Ancient knowledge, refined through generations of survival in harsh environments, suddenly became cutting-edge military doctrine. The Germans, with their emphasis on modern technological warfare, missed this entirely. They studied ballistics, optics, and precision manufacturing. The Soviets studied survival. And in the ruins of Stalingrad, survival won. Post-war analysis by American and British military advisors confirmed what Soviet commanders already knew. The signal tactics represented a fundamental breakthrough in small unit tactics. NATO forces began incorporating similar techniques into their own counter-sniper training. The taps that started as improvised desperation in frozen ruins became doctrine in military academies worldwide. But the Soviets were already moving on. They had won the war not by being stronger, but by being more adaptable. And that lesson, that survival belongs to those who can transform their environment into advantage, would define their military philosophy for the next half-century. The cost, however, was profound. Soviet counter-sniper teams suffered casualty rates approaching 70%. For every German marksman killed, 2 Soviet soldiers died setting the trap. The signal tactics worked, but they weren't magic. They were blood and mathematics, sacrifice given strategic purpose. Nina Lobkovskaya survived the war with 134 confirmed kills. She returned to her village in Ukraine to find it destroyed, her family dead. The signal tactics had saved the front, but they couldn't save everything. She rarely spoke about her service. When asked once by a journalist how she could kill so many people, she replied, "I didn't kill people. I killed the war, one soldier at a time. There's a difference." Ludmila Pavlichenko became the most decorated female combatant in Soviet history, but struggled with what we would now recognize as severe PTSD. The silence after the war, she said, was harder than the silence before the shot. She died in 1974, her story largely forgotten in the West, remembered as legend in Russia. Klaus Hoffmann, the German sniper killed by Nina in February 1943, was 26 years old. He left behind a wife and daughter who never learned exactly where or how he died. His body was recovered during battlefield cleanup in 1944 and buried in a mass grave. His name appears on a memorial in Bavaria, one of 27,000 listed there. Today, military historians regard the Soviet signal tactics as one of the most innovative developments in modern warfare, a case study in asymmetric adaptation and psychological operations. Special forces around the world study these techniques, though the specific methodologies remain partially classified even 80 years later. But perhaps the real legacy isn't military, it's philosophical. The signal tactics proved that warfare isn't just about firepower or technology. It's about cognition, perception, and the ability to weaponize your enemy's assumptions. The Germans assumed sound was just noise. The Soviets understood that sound was information. That difference decided battles. In the ruins of Stalingrad, where the temperature dropped to 40 below zero and the city became a monument to human destruction, Soviet soldiers proved something essential. Intelligence doesn't require resources. Adaptation doesn't require superiority. Victory requires understanding that every element of your environment, even silence, even sound, can become a weapon if you're creative enough, desperate enough, committed enough. The taps are silent now. The snipers are gone. The ruins have been rebuilt. But the lesson echoes. In war, and perhaps in life, the most powerful weapon isn't the one you carry. It's the one you invent when you have no other choice. If this story revealed something about courage and innovation you've never heard before, share it, so others can discover that history's greatest victories often came not from strength, but from those quiet moments when someone decided that survival meant transformation. Fact integrity line. Every event, date, figure, and tactical description in this documentary has been verified through historical records, military archives, and documented veteran testimonies. The metallic echo fades into memory, but in that silence something permanent was forged. The knowledge that fear, when understood completely, becomes the weapon that defeats itself.